Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reading Old Handwriting with the Library of Virginia. We're delighted to see so much interest in this topic. Whether you're using the Library of Virginia collections for research or transcribing archival documents on making history transcribe, reading old handwriting is essential to understanding the past.
Hello, my name is August Moulis. My pronouns are they, them. I am a serials acquisitions technician at the Library of Virginia. I discovered transcribing 10 years ago when I started work at the library in 2014, and I've been hooked ever since.
I'm John Deal, and I am an editor and historian here at the Library of Virginia. I've been with the library for more than 20 years, and it is a pleasure to be with you today to talk about reading old handwriting.
Many of you may be familiar already with the Making History Transcribe website through the Library of Virginia. And there is a transcription tips page accessible through that website, and you'll find tips tailored to the material available here to transcribe at the Library of Virginia. It also has some tips for basic formatting guidelines to be aware of while using and making the Making History Transcribe website, as well as FAQs and some examples of common abbreviations. This presentation will expand on these basics. So it's not always pretty. Reading old handwriting takes time and effort and practice. Each writer has a slightly different style. Example alphabets show the letters at their best, but not in actual documents, it can get pretty messy. The people writing the documents we're transcribing today would probably be surprised how much effort goes into deciphering their writing. It's not always easy, but with practice and patience, patterns such as common phrases, unique letter formation, and abbreviations will become more familiar. Capital letters often have more flourishes and details. They can look similar to other letters or be mistaken for two letters. Capital letters can be tricky, and some writers will capitalize whatever words they feel like instead of following modern rules. If you're stuck, use the rest of the word to see what letter might logically be. The examples on this page highlight some letters that can mimic others. So you can see, most of these are names, but you can see that there's a lot of capital letters that can sort of look very similar to other capital letters, so be on the lookout for that. So with letter variation, a single letter may appear several different ways, even in the same word or throughout the whole document. The writer may have a specific way of forming a certain letter that's not common or is very unique to their personality and the way that they write. With no set rules for how letters should look, you'll likely see a lot of variation. Sometimes going letter by letter through a word can help. If you find a clearer example in one word, you can always go back and compare it to previous words that have you stumped. Signatures can be difficult to transcribe because the style looks different than the rest of the document, often because it was written in the writer's own handwriting. It's different than the scribe who's written the rest of the document. They can also contain abbreviations and fancy capital letters. The letters can also run together and often use abbreviations. Some common ones can be found on the transcription tips page.
So abbreviations, like many folks today, they use abbreviations in all kinds of handwriting. And of course, the etc., which is we use DO, and the slash marks for ditto. You'll see that a lot in financial records and in census records and those kinds of things. You've also got lots of names that are abbreviated. The usual ones, BENG for Benjamin, EDW for Edward, JNO for John, JS for James. You'll see with the Robert and Samuel example that there's a superscript T and a superscript L for those names. And the examples that you see there's lots of those things. So like Thomas in the middle at the bottom, it's THO with an S as a superscript. You'll also see a lot of times if somebody has a name like McFadden or one of those MC names, the C might be above the M as a superscript, or sometimes below as a subscript, just to confuse us. And you'll also see like Robert and Samuel, not necessarily using the superscript, but let's say ROBT and SAML. So lots of abbreviations in documents. And let's see what else we've got. So here are some more examples. Military terms are often abbreviated. Instant, adjutant, brigade, captain, Captain can be CAP or CAPT, of course. Things like infantry, obedience, and regiment are often abbreviated. Signatures are often pretty tough. And so here's one where it's not just the signature, but the closing. You know, lots of formal documents, sort of 19th century and back, they were very formal in their closing. And so like this one, it'll say sort of very respectfully, and it's your OBT, obedience, SCRVNT, servant. So again, it's very deferential, and you'll see that a lot of times, not only in military letters and documents, but also in business and certainly in government and matters of states. Luckily, the signature here is pretty clear. It's a C. Derrick, and you'll see that Mr. Derrick is actually Lieutenant Colonel Derrick, right? LT period, COL period. And he is commanding, COMDG, a little G right there, commanding, and of course, BALT, Baltimore. Another issue with signatures that I've noticed when I've been approving making history documents is if there is a letterhead or if there is a personalized stationery, a lot of times that will match the signature at the end of the document. And it may seem obvious, but sometimes we don't think about that. And so if you've got, let's say, a 5-page letter and you're on page 5 where the signature is and you can't make it out, well, if there is stationery or a letterhead, go back to that first page. Maybe the signature is the vice president of this corporation, or it's a director of this corporation, or let's say the personalized stationery just has somebody's initials. That may be enough to help you get the rest of the word. So again, we'll be talking about context quite a bit here, but that's just kind of a neat trick that we don't always think about, since we don't really use as much personalized stationery as people once did, because we don't write as many letters. All right, so the leading S, I'm sure you've seen this in documents such as it resembles the sort of cursive F, and it mostly shows up where the first S in the words, when there are two S's next to each other. And so here you see the Congress of the United States with the F for the double S. And of course, you can see here Jesse, Jesse, with that F. It looks like an F, but actually it's a leading S. And we'll see those in a few documents coming up here in a second. So again, the leading S can look like other letters, for example, P. And again, as we talked about, the superscript letters can be attached to the next letter, as we have here in McReynolds, and we have depositions of attorneys. Sometimes words will be split between lines with one or without a dash. When transcribing, be sure to join the word. Essentially, the search engine needs the whole words to be able to search on those names. And here we've got a good example of a James Simpkins, here where those arrows are.
Oftentimes you'll run across a phrase that, like in this document, the phrase that's circled is being court. And in the top example, I was having trouble understanding what it was saying because it has a dot before and after the T, which may be how this person indicates crosses T's, or maybe they just accidentally left a dot, but it was making me think that there was an I in the word court. But you can see in the bottom example, in a later instance of the same person writing, they wrote it a little more clearly. You can even see that it says court. So it can be very helpful to compare letters written by the same person in different instances, and you can always come back to something if you're stuck on it with fresh eyes later. So go through the rest of the document, you might find something that will help you with something earlier and that you're having trouble with.
This person, luckily, the handwriting is really good, but the person decides that they do not want to cross their T's. And so we see in this sentence 1,820, and the T's are not crossed. Down there, witnesseth, the T is not crossed, and we see another leading S. Down here, we have to thee, said James Doswell. Again, 204 acres. And then we've got some stacking down here, sort of by the land, by the land, and by the land, since this is essentially a deed. Again, the importance of context. In the right-hand corner of this document, I can see that the word attorney is there. And so I can see that this is a legal document of some kind. And so we've got some context clues, what type of documents and what words are around it. So where I have the arrows, the words are for the PLT against the DEFT. And I see that there's a name Joseph that is sort of at the end. So obviously we can know that PLT is going to be plaintiff against the DEFT defendant. So again, the type of document that it is going to help you to kind of figure out what the words might be. Down here where that middle arrow is, again, we have the word quarterly, and what is quarterly? Sessions, with our leading S or our long S as well. And then aforesaid, which is sort of an antiquated term, meaning the statement has already been made. Again, more legal terms. A lot of documents are legal terms. They're difficult because we don't come across those words very often. So here again, we've got witnesseth and aforesaid, testament. We've got hath, which is have, doth, do, assigned. And again, what do we notice here? The person decided not to cross any of their T's. But thank goodness it's actually consistent. And then we can figure out what the word is that they are saying. Spelling challenges. Don't underestimate how people can butcher the English language, either in speech or in writing. And a lot of times you'll see something that is spelled and it's spelled phonetically. So here the example is, I seat, S-E-A-T-E, myself to answer yours epistle of the 16, which came to hand a few. I didn't know what that word was, but I know days ago, and that looks like an F, and that looks like a W. So again, using the words around it, I can figure out that that is some sort of F-E-I-U-W, some kind of spelling for few. Great, G-R-A-T-E, satisfaction, satisfaction with a D. And at the very end, glad to hear that you was well. I am well at this time. Again, spelling challenges, don't underestimate those. And one last fun example of, again, what's that word? So this is a letter that we found from the World War I Profiles of Honor. And it's a letter from a young man named David Castleman, a soldier, to his girlfriend, Mary Pride Jones. And he is writing from France, let's see, in April of 1919. And he's writing to her that he's about to come home soon. But he's writing, he says, today noon, I broke the news of my expected early departure to Madame Clochey. She seemed quite distressed. She says it will be very, and I didn't know that word, here after I shall have left, and that she is going to close up here and leave for Madagascar. And that word I didn't really know. I knew he tried to drop some conversational French in there, and so I thought, well, I know that letter is an X, and I think that's a U, and I think that's an E at the beginning. And so I typed in E and UX and put in said French word World War I, and it came up as ennui, which is the French word for boring. So again, context is really important. Google is very much your friend in terms of trying to figure out what might be happening in these documents, especially when they're using terms that we're not familiar with, or if they're using foreign language terms.
I find that if you're stuck on a word, it can be really helpful to go letter by letter. Even if the result looks like nonsense, it may help to see the word clearer. Or if you type your nonsense word into Google, it may magically autocorrect it into something that might make sense. So enter your best guess into a search engine, because it could be, again, like John was showing you, a lot of phonetic spelling, or even an archaic word that you're not familiar with. I know I've learned a lot of new words going through the transcriptions that it didn't look like a real word, but when you look it up, it does exist. And be sure to use the context around the problem word to help brainstorm what it could logically be. I know it can be definitely, you can get it stuck in your head that you think you know what it is, but it doesn't really make sense in the context of the sentence. So be thinking about the context. When you're really not sure, you can put your best guess in brackets with a question mark, or you can put illegible in brackets in the place of the mystery word, so that someone coming along behind you who might have an idea of what it is can replace that with what they think the word is. And the more you transcribe it, the easier it will become. Common abbreviations, phrases, and styles of handwriting will be easier to understand. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and a second opinion can make all the difference. I know I still have to ask for help or get someone else, get a second pair of eyes to look at what I'm transcribing. These are some links that are some resources that have more good examples of many of the topics covered in this presentation.
Thank you. We do have a few questions that have come in. Let me go ahead and read a couple of those off to you. From Susan, she asks, somewhere along the line, I got the idea that when a document was transcribed, it has to be done verbatim, word for word, with spelling and grammar errors, etc. But I am hearing that we should fix things like names that are separated. When do we transcribe the document as is, and when do we fix it? We do usually want you to include everything exactly as it is in the original document. What John mentions about just rejoining the words that are split across lines, that's just so that the full text search actually recognizes those words and can find them. So that's really the only change we would recommend that you make. Any other changes, we would ask that you make in square brackets, and that is to note that this is different from the original document. Okay, we have a question about abbreviations from Kelly. Kelly asks, do you find that if people use an abbreviation for a name, that they use it continuously? For example, using Eber instead of Ebenezer, would this person always be referring to themselves as Eber? John, any ideas?
Yes, they actually would. A lot of times what they'll do is they might say in the salutation or something, they might use somebody's real name, full name, and then use it as shorthand throughout the letter. I've always been surprised how many legal documents use J&O for John or JAS for James. I thought that was interesting that a legally binding document, the abbreviation was well accepted.
Sometimes you may see it abbreviated in one place and written all the way out in another place in the document. Like if they may write the name out in the body of the document, but then abbreviate it in the signature. I've seen that before. But most abbreviation formats are pretty consistent.
Our next question comes from Troy, and Troy asks, is there a good handwriting OCR program that can assist with the transcription? So Troy, you know this, other people may not. OCR stands for Optical Character Recognition, and it's a computer program that recognizes characters such as letters. You have to train it to recognize a letter. For instance, you would say, these are all examples of what an A can look like, and then you would train the program to recognize things that look like that. I've worked a little bit with training OCRs, and I'll have to tell you that there is not a great one for handwriting right now. We use OCR technology on our Virginia Chronicle site for newspapers. Those are more consistent, but when you think about the variety of handwriting, it's just very difficult to make a good OCR program for those. Just the human variety of all of the letter shapes that we might make. So I know that there is ongoing research into a handwriting OCR program. I believe that the Vatican museums and archives were actually leading the way in that, the last thing I saw about it. But we're always keeping an eye out. And until then, we are relying on transcribers like those of you in this session to help us transcribe Library of Virginia documents and make them searchable. Rachel asks, any tips for transcribing census or other schedules where the literary context is not available as they are in letters or correspondence? If it's something like a census or just a list of names, something where there's not a lot of context, how do you start to decode that?
Yeah, lists of names can be tricky additionally because it can be written in different hands or be unfamiliar names, but just take it one step at a time. And if you're really having trouble, again, go through letter by letter. You're not always going to have context.
I've seen the worst penmanship and census records than perhaps anywhere else. Find a word or a letter that you can absolutely recognize, and then sort of use that as kind of a key to move into other records. And so if there's, John Smith is listed somewhere and you can tell, okay, that's how this person wrote a capital S and an M, right? And go through and say, okay, pick out each letter. And then you can sort of, develop how this particular census enumerator or county record person is writing out the sentences. The other thing I would say, just as a warning on the census record, is there's multiple ways that census names can be butchered. So you've got the person at home that is giving the name to the census enumerator. So are they, enunciating their name? And then you've got the census enumerator who's listening. Is he or she, did they hear it correctly? Do they have hard of hearing? And then on top of that, then it's written down. So you've got at least 3 places where names can get butchered in census records. And that is unfortunate because you'll see something and it's like, well, that really can't be the person's name. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So that's a really good question. And unfortunately, there's no magic cure for some of those.
We had a question here about unnamed children, unnamed babies, and using the abbreviation INFT or infant to describe those children in an 1850 census. Chad asks, are there any other terms for an unnamed child? Maybe someone a little older than an infant.
Well, in census records, I've actually seen no name written in the line where there should be a name, or it might be blank. But other than, I've never seen the word toddler or young person or something like that. It seems that infants were not named immediately sometimes like they are now, right? And people would have a baby and sort of wait on naming him or her. I've seen that occasionally in census records for the infant, as you say, but not for any older children.
We have a question from Vicky who asks, what advice do you offer for reading letters on thin paper where people wrote in one direction and in the other direction, writing across previously written lines due to limitation on paper stock? That is very difficult to read.
I have come across it before, and this may not be the case with every instance, but in some cases you can kind of focus on the slants to the right, so that might be a little helpful. But I know it's hard to tune out all the noise of the other writing that's going over top of it.
When I run across that is I will use a ruler as my horizontal line, and that way I can sort of drown out the noise of the cross line.
Lee says, I notice wills use standard phrases and language. Is there a template of standard phrases usually used in wills from different eras?
You're exactly right that there are some standard salutations and closings for legal documents. I'm not familiar of any precise websites or links.
So I would recommend like a legal or law dictionary. We'll have a lot of terms, and I've also come across like Latin phrases. That's going to be helpful for that if it's something that you're not familiar with.
Yeah, I think looking in those legal dictionaries and other sources like that can really help you understand those wills. I think on the Transcribe site, we have linked to Black's Legal Dictionary, which is one of the well-known sites for that. Susan asks, do you know the abbreviations in newspapers of instant and proximo?
I've seen instant much more in legal documents in terms of something that's happened instant and kind of sort of a timestamp sort of thing. I have not seen proximal myself.
Well, we may have an answer from a participant. Susan White says it refers to the dates this month, next month, and last month. Proximo can equal the previous month.
While folks are thinking about questions, something just did occur to me. If you're going through documents and let's say on the first or second page, you're having trouble with a word, I often will move ahead to another page, and maybe they have used a similar or that same word on a different page, but actually spelled it better, surprisingly enough. Try to look at the style of the person's handwriting and help you letter by letter. And I would also say, if you get sort of frustrated at a certain word, sort of just move on. Transcriptions, it's supposed to be a positive experience. I think on the Making History site, we asked that you put it in brackets with illegible. Is that correct, Sonia?
Yes, absolutely.
I was just going to say, again, reiterate that you can put in illegible if you really have no clue, but you can also put your best guess, even if your best guess is a jumble of letters and what you see of the word that could still help the next person coming along.
If you would like to put your transcription skills to use, we would love your help on any of our crowdsourcing projects, including Transcribe, Virginia Chronicle, which was mentioned, that hosts all of the library's newspapers, and also From the Page, which is another crowdsourcing website. It is run through Hands-On Greater Richmond, which is a local volunteer group. You do not have to be local to participate. However, you can join from wherever you are today. So just know that there are more sessions coming up, and if you have additional questions, you can always email us at makinghistory@virginiamemory.com. We're available to help you with your questions. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. So keep it up with reading Old Handwriting, and we hope to see you again at a Library of Virginia presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.